Hey guys, tonight we're going to take a journey into a world that fueled an empire, but at an unimaginable human cost. Imagine this, it's 4:00 a.m. in a grimy, soot-stained cottage in Victorian England, and the frigid air bites at your exposed skin as you climb out of a straw-filled cot. The only light comes from a sputtering oil lamp, casting dancing shadows on the cracked walls. Outside, the world is still cloaked in pre-dawn darkness, but the distant rhythmic thump, thump, thump of a mine engine already signals the start of another brutal day. You pull on your rough, damp clothes, feeling the familiar ache in your joints before you've even moved. This isn't just about going to work. It's about descending into a black, unforgiving maw that demands your strength, your health, and often your very life. You probably won't survive this, or at least not with your lungs intact. But we're going to delve into the horrifying life of a coal miner in Victorian England. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're feeling adventurous, drop your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where you guys are tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're a coal miner, perhaps a young man in your late teens, following in the footsteps of your father and grandfather. Or maybe you're a child, barely 8 years old, already accustomed to the darkness and the dust. The year's somewhere in the mid-19th century. Victorian England, a global superpower, is in the throes of the Industrial Revolution. Its factories churning, its trains roaring, its homes warmed. All of it, every cog and chimney, depends on one thing: coal, and you, down in the suffocating depths of the earth, are its source. You quickly learn that the majesty of the British Empire is built on the sweat and suffering of people just like you, hidden far beneath the surface. Your breakfast is meager: a hunk of stale bread, perhaps a bit of cheese, washed down with weak tea. There's no time for anything more. Your mother or wife packs a small tin box with your lunch. More bread, maybe some cold potatoes, enough to keep the gnawing hunger at bay, but certainly not enough to fuel the grueling labor ahead. Your only companion, apart from your family's worried glances, is the small, flickering flame of your safety lamp, a fragile beacon against the encroaching darkness. As you step out of your cottage, the air is sharp and cold, carrying the acrid scent of coal smoke from the nearby pit head. Other figures, hunched against the dawn chill, are already shuffling along the muddy paths towards the mine. Most are men, but you notice children too, some even younger than you, their small frames already bowed by premature labor. Women, too, are part of this grim procession, though their roles will be different. This isn't just a job, it's a way of life. A generational curse that pulls entire families into the maw of the earth. One mainstream historical fact that immediately defines your existence is that Victorian coal mining was an incredibly dangerous and physically brutal profession, characterized by extremely long hours, meager wages, pervasive health risks from dust and poor air quality, and a constant threat of fatal accidents like explosions and cave-ins. For entire communities, the mine was the only source of livelihood, trapping generations in this horrifying existence. Think about it every single day. You're willingly descending into a place that actively tries to kill you. A particularly quirky tidbit that reflects the casual brutality of the era is the widespread use of child labor, sometimes involving children as young as 4 or 5 years old, employed as trappers to open and close ventilation doors in the pitch-black tunnels, sitting alone for 12 hours a day. Imagine a tiny child, all alone in the dark, performing a critical task that determined the very airflow for hundreds of men. Their only companion, the fear of total darkness and rats. Historians still argue whether the widespread reliance on child labor in Victorian mines was primarily an economic necessity for impoverished families, as every family member's wage, no matter how small, was vital for survival, or if it was more a systemic exploitation driven by greedy mine owners seeking the cheapest possible labor for tasks that adults could also perform. Was it desperation or exploitation that put children in the pit? You reach the mine head, the towering headgear, a skeletal silhouette against the lightening sky, looms ominously. The clatter of machinery, the hiss of steam, and the smell of grease and coal dust fill the air. You join the line of men, each carrying his lamp and lunch pail, their faces grim, resigned. There's no cheery banter, no light-hearted greetings, just the shared, unspoken understanding of the perils ahead. You step into the cage, a simple, open iron cage, barely large enough to hold a few men. It smells of damp earth and stale air. The gate clangs shut, and with a lurch, you begin your descent. The daylight quickly vanishes, replaced by an inky blackness, broken only by the feeble glow of your lamp. The air grows heavier, colder, then warmer, more humid, and you begin to hear the creak of timber, the drip of water, and the distant rumble of the mine. Your stomach lurches. This isn't just going to work. It's a horrifying descent into a subterranean nightmare, a world built on black gold and human misery. And every downward foot is a step further into the awful truth of a Victorian coal miner's life. The cage jolts to a halt, jarring your teeth, and the gate creaks open. You step out, not into a vast cavern, but into an oppressive, claustrophobic darkness. This is the pit cramped, stifling. Forget the wide-open spaces of the surface. The mine is a labyrinth of narrow, low-ceiling tunnels, barely wide enough for your shoulders, and so low you often have to crawl or stoop for hundreds of yards at a time. The air is thick, hot, and heavy, making every breath a conscious effort, a grim reminder of how far you are from the open sky. It's like being trapped inside a giant, dusty, perpetually dark wormhole, where the walls are always closing in and the air is always running out. Your small oil lamp, clutched in your hand or hooked to your cap, casts only a meager circle of light, barely illuminating the rough-hewn rock and timber around you. The darkness beyond is absolute, a tangible, suffocating presence. You begin to shuffle forward, perhaps crouching, perhaps crawling on hands and knees, your body quickly growing accustomed to the unnatural postures. The cold, damp rock presses in on you from all sides, its rough texture scraping against your clothes and skin. The sounds of the pit are as oppressive as the darkness. The drip. Drip, drip of water from the ceiling, gathering in muddy puddles underfoot. The distant rumble of coal wagons, pulled by ponies or children, echoing eerily through the tunnels. The rhythmic thud of pick striking coal, a constant monotonous rhythm that marks the passage of your grueling shift. And the breathing of your fellow miners, heavy and labored, a constant reminder of the thick, dust-laden air you all share. One mainstream historical fact that completely shatters any romanticized notion of mining is that Victorian coal mines were notoriously cramped, poorly ventilated, and often extremely hot due to deep excavation, forcing miners to work in extremely confined spaces, often lying on their sides or crawling for extended periods, leading to widespread respiratory issues and constant physical discomfort. The deeper the seam, the tighter and hotter the conditions often became. Think about spending 12 hours a day in a space barely bigger than your bed, completely cut off from the natural light and fresh air. A particularly quirky tidbit that demonstrates the extreme conditions is the practice of hurrying or pudding. This involved children, sometimes as young as 6, crawling through tunnels too low for adults, pulling heavy carts of coal behind them using chains attached to belts around their waists. Imagine a tiny child crawling through dust and darkness, dragging a heavy load with their own body, their small limbs straining in the cramped space. Historians still argue whether the extreme confinement and poor ventilation in Victorian mines were primarily due to the limitations of existing mining technology, which couldn't effectively create larger, better ventilated tunnels in all seams, or if it was also a deliberate cost-saving measure by mine owners, prioritizing coal extraction over miner comfort and safety, knowing that cheap labor was abundant. Was it technological limitation or economic exploitation that made the pit so awful? The air quality is atrocious. Coal dust, fine and insidious, hangs perpetually in the air, coating everything in a layer of black grime. Your lungs begin to ache almost immediately, burning with every breath. You cough, a dry, rasping cough, and taste the grit of coal on your tongue. Ventilation, if it exists, is primitive. Perhaps a system of air doors operated by child trappers, remember them, that attempts to direct airflow? Or simply a deep shaft drawing air in. But in the long, winding tunnels, pockets of stagnant, foul air are common. The heat, especially in deeper seams, is oppressive. The earth itself radiates warmth, and the exertion of physical labor in a confined space quickly raises your body temperature. Sweat stings your eyes, mixes with the coal dust on your skin, and drips from your brow, soaking your clothes. You are constantly damp, constantly uncomfortable. Your body struggling to cope with the unnatural environment. You crawl through a particularly narrow passage, your back scraping against the roof, your knees protesting against the rough floor. You pass other miners, their faces blackened with coal dust, their eyes, the whites startlingly bright, reflecting the dim light of their lamps. They nod or offer a grunt of acknowledgement, their shared misery a silent bond. The claustrophobia, a constant low-level hum of anxiety, presses in on you, a subconscious fear of the tons of rock above your head, threatening to crush you at any moment. The pit is a world apart, a subterranean prison built for labor, where every breath is a risk and every movement is a struggle against the confines of the earth. The awful truth about being a coal miner in Victorian England isn't just about the work itself. It's about the relentless, oppressive reality of the pit. A cramped, stifling, and suffocating existence that slowly, inexorably, grinds down your body and spirit, making you an unwilling resident of the dark, unforgiving underworld. Even if you somehow learn to tolerate the cramped, stifling confines of the pit, an insidious, ever-present killer would begin its slow, relentless work on your body dust and disease. Black Lung's scourge, the air you breathe, thick with pulverized coal particles, is a poison, silently invading your lungs with every labored breath. This isn't just an inconvenience, it's a guaranteed agonizing decline into chronic illness and premature death. A horrifying reality that every miner knew, but few could escape. It's like being forced to breathe in sandpaper for 12 hours a day, knowing it's slowly turning your insides to stone. You cough. It's a deep, rattling cough, dry and persistent, bringing up not phlegm, but black, gritty sputum. This is the miner's cough, a ubiquitous sound in the pit, a constant reminder of the unseen enemy that permeates every corner of your working life. The air is so thick with coal dust that your lamp's feeble beam seems to swim through a black haze. Every swing of your pickaxe, every shovelful of coal, sends up new clouds of the fine, insidious particles, which you immediately inhale. One mainstream historical fact that utterly defines the long-term horror of mining is that coal dust exposure in Victorian mines led to widespread and debilitating respiratory diseases, most notably pneumoconiosis, commonly known as black lung disease, which caused progressive lung damage, chronic breathlessness, and was a leading cause of premature death among miners. This occupational hazard was poorly understood and largely unregulated for decades. Imagine trying to clear your throat, but feeling as though it's permanently lined with sandpaper. Your breathing becomes shallower, more rapid, and a constant whistling or rasping sound accompanies every exhale. Your face, hands, and clothing are perpetually coated in a fine layer of black dust. But the true horror is the dust that adheres to the insides of your lungs, causing inflammation and scarring that slowly, inexorably, chokes the life out of you. A particularly quirky tidbit that reflects the miner's grim awareness of their fate is the prevalence of spitting. Miners would constantly spit out the black phlegm, sometimes even competing over who could produce the darkest or thickest sputum. This wasn't just a gross habit, it was a visible, if futile, attempt to rid their bodies of the invading dust, a grim marker of their unavoidable deterioration. Imagine measuring your health by the blackness of your spit, a truly depressing progress report. Historians still argue whether the extreme prevalence of black lung and other respiratory illnesses among Victorian miners was primarily due to a lack of effective ventilation technology to clear dust, or if it was also exacerbated by deliberate industry negligence. Prioritizing output over investment in basic dust suppression measures, knowing that sick or dying miners could easily be replaced from the vast labor pool? Was it technological limitation? Or callous disregard near that fueled the scourge? Beyond black lung, other respiratory ailments were rampant. Chronic bronchitis, emphysema, and tuberculosis thrived in the damp, cold, and dusty conditions of the mine, constantly preying on weakened lungs. You would see men, young and old, struggling for breath, their chests heaving, their lives slowly reduced to a wheezing, agonizing struggle for air. The sound of a miner struggling to breathe was as common as the sound of picks hitting coal. The onset of these diseases was often insidious, slowly creeping up on miners over years of exposure. In your youth, you might feel strong, seemingly immune, but by your 30s or 40s, the symptoms would inevitably appear persistent coughs, shortness of breath even during light activity, and a general wasting away of your body. You'd watch older miners, men who had spent decades in the pit, gasping for air, unable to work, eventually confined to their beds, their lungs hardened and useless. There was no cure, no effective treatment. Doctors, if available, and it had little to offer beyond basic palliatives. The best advice was to simply avoid the dust, an impossible feat for a coal miner. The only solution was to stop working in the mine. But for most families, this meant starvation, forcing them to choose between a slow death from lung disease or a quicker death from hunger. You feel the constant irritation in your throat, the tightening in your chest, and the dull ache in your lungs, knowing that every breath you take is bringing you closer to that inevitable, agonizing decline. The awful truth about being a coal miner in Victorian England isn't just about the immediate dangers of the pit. It's about the relentless, horrifying reality of the dust. An invisible killer that silently invades your body, slowly suffocating the life out of you, making Black Lung's scourge the most pervasive and tragic legacy of a life spent in the darkness, all for the black gold that fueled an empire. Even more terrifying than the insidious creep of coal dust was the sudden, catastrophic horror that lurked in the unventilated depths. Explosions, fire damp's fury. This wasn't a gradual decline, it was an instant, indiscriminate inferno, ripping through the tunnels with unimaginable force, incinerating everything in its path, and often leaving behind a secondary, equally deadly, aftermath. You live with the constant gnawing fear that at any moment a spark, a lamp, even a misplaced breath, could ignite the invisible enemy around you, turning your workspace into a fiery, collapsing tomb. It's like living inside a giant, unstable bomb, where any flicker of light could be the fuse. You're working deep in a seam, perhaps lying on your side, pickaxe in hand, chipping away at the black wall. The air is warm and heavy, and you might notice a faint, unusual smell, a sickly sweet odor that some call fire damp. This is methane gas, released from the coal seams, and it's invisible, odorless in its pure form, and incredibly volatile when mixed with air. You rely on the flicker of your lamp, a sudden lengthening of the flame, a subtle change in its color, might be the only warning. But often, there's no warning at all. One mainstream historical fact that highlights this ultimate danger is that methane gas fire damp explosions were a devastating and frequent cause of mass casualties in Victorian coal mines, instantly incinerating miners, causing massive cave-ins, and leading to deadly after-damp carbon monoxide that suffocated any survivors of the blast. These explosions were the most feared and spectacular form of mining disaster. Imagine the sudden, deafening roar, a flash of blinding light, a wave of scorching heat, and then the world erupts. You are thrown violently. The air sucked from your lungs as timbers splinter, rocks shatter, and the very earth seems to explode around you. The force is immense, crushing, obliterating. If you're caught in the immediate blast zone, your fate is instantaneous and horrific. You might be incinerated or crushed beyond recognition, your body becoming just another part of the shattered, burning debris. A particularly quirky tidbit that demonstrates the grim reality of methane detection is the use of caged canaries. Miners would carry these small birds into the shafts. If the canary stopped singing or collapsed, it indicated the presence of dangerous gases like carbon monoxide or methane before it reached explosive levels, giving miners a precious, albeit brief, warning. Imagine trusting your life to a tiny bird, its song literally the gauge of your survival, and its silence a harbinger of death. Historians still argue whether the slow adoption of safety lamps like the Davy lamp and improved ventilation systems in Victorian mines was primarily due to the immense cost of implementing such technologies across thousands of pits, or if it was also hampered by owner resistance to regulations and worker mistrust of newfangled devices. Perpetuating the risks. Was it about expense or resistance to change that kept fire damp's fury alive? Even if you survive the initial blast, the dangers are far from over. The explosion often leads to massive cave-ins, trapping survivors under tons of rock. The timbers supporting the tunnels, charred and splintered, collapse, sealing off escape routes and burying anyone beneath them. You might be injured, perhaps with broken limbs or severe burns, trapped in the darkness, struggling to breathe. Then comes the afterdamp. This is the invisible, odorless killer that follows the explosion. It's a mixture of carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, and nitrogen, created by the combustion of methane and coal dust. Anyone who survived the blast itself, but is caught in the afterdamp, slowly succumbs to suffocation. You might feel a sudden dizziness, a crushing headache, and then a strange, peaceful drowsiness as the invisible gas steals the oxygen from your blood. You'd see men simply slump, their lives quietly extinguished by the insidious gas, a more merciful end than incineration, but an end nonetheless. Rescue efforts, if they even reached you, would be slow and incredibly dangerous, as rescuers themselves face the threat of further explosions, fresh cave-ins, and the lingering afterdamp. The scenes after a major explosion were apocalyptic bodies, mangled beyond recognition, fires burning uncontrollably, and the air thick with smoke and the stench of death. Entire families in the mining villages would gather at the pit head, waiting in agonizing silence, knowing that each passing hour dimmed the hope of finding any survivors. You feel the constant low thrum of anxiety in your stomach, a perpetual knot of fear that at any moment, the very air you breathe could ignite, turning your world into a hellish inferno. The awful truth about being a coal miner in Victorian England isn't just about the back-breaking labor or the slow death from dust. It's about the terrifying, instantaneous violence of fire-damp explosions, the most horrifying and indiscriminate killer in the pit, turning life into ash in a single devastating, fiery breath. Even if the terrifying specter of fire-damp explosions didn't claim your life, another, perhaps more constant, threat loomed silently in the darkness of the pit cave-ins, crushing rock. The very earth you toiled beneath was inherently unstable, prone to sudden collapses, minor rock falls, and massive roof failures, turning your workplace into a perpetual game of chance where tons of rock could descend without warning, burying, crushing, or trapping you in an instant. You quickly learn that every creak of timber, every trickle of dust from above, is a chilling reminder that the ground beneath your feet is always conspiring to become your tomb. It's like working inside a colossal, unstable sandcastle that could collapse on you at any moment, and your only warning is a few grains of sand. You're working in a newly opened gallery, The air heavy with coal dust. Above you, the roof is supported by crude timber props, perhaps salvaged from older workings. You listen intently to the sounds of the mine, trying to distinguish the normal groans of the earth from the ominous creak of straining timber or the unsettling trickle of loose debris. Miners developed an almost sixth sense for these warnings, an instinct honed by years of working in a perpetually unstable environment. One mainstream historical fact that highlights this pervasive danger is that cave-ins and roof collapses were a constant, daily threat in Victorian coal mines, caused by unstable geology, inadequate timbering or supports, and the inherent stresses of excavation, leading to numerous fatalities and severe injuries among miners, often trapping them for days or crushing them instantly. These geological hazards were an inescapable part of the job. Imagine the suddenness. A low rumble, a sharp crack, and then a cascade of rock and earth descends. You might have only a split second to react, to dive for cover, or to press yourself against a solid wall. The sound is deafening, a roar of falling rock, the splintering of timber props, the terrified screams of your comrades. If you're caught directly beneath the collapse, your fate is instantaneous and brutal. Tons of rock crush your body, ending your life in a terrifying final embrace of the earth. A particularly quirky tidbit that demonstrates the miners' desperate attempts to mitigate this danger is their reliance on small, often simple, and rituals or superstitions. Some miners would carry a piece of coal from a lucky seam, or tap their pickaxe 3 times on the roof before starting work, believing these small acts could ward off collapses. Imagine trying to ward off tons of falling rock with a bit of good luck charm, knowing full well it probably won't do anything. Historians still argue whether the high incidence of cave-ins in Victorian mines was primarily due to a lack of advanced geological understanding and proper engineering for tunnel support, or if it was exacerbated by mine owners pushing for faster extraction, sometimes cutting corners on timbering or forcing miners to work in inherently dangerous, unsupported areas to maximize output. Was it ignorance of geology or greed for coal that caused so many collapses? Even if you're not in the immediate path of the collapse, the dangers are immense. The sheer force of the falling rock creates powerful air blasts that can throw men violently against walls or send debris flying. Dust, already a constant problem, erupts into blinding clouds, further disorienting you. Escape routes can be instantly cut off, leaving you trapped in the darkness, often injured, with little hope of rescue. The aftermath of a major cave-in is a scene of utter devastation. Tunnels are completely blocked, transformed into impassable walls of rock and timber. The bodies of your comrades, if found, are often mangled beyond recognition, entombed beneath the earth they sought to extract. Rescue efforts, as we'll discuss later, were slow, dangerous, and frequently futile, as digging through tons of unstable debris was a desperate and often impossible task. The air would be thick with the smell of damp earth, pulverized rock, and the chilling scent of despair. Minor rockfalls are almost a daily occurrence. A handful of pebbles, a larger chunk of coal, or a small piece of roof shale might fall, narrowly missing your head or striking a glancing blow. These serve as constant, unnerving reminders of the ever-present threat. Keeping your nerves perpetually frayed, you learn to work with a heightened sense of awareness, your ears constantly straining, your eyes scanning the roof above, searching for the telltale signs of instability. You feel the subtle shift in the ground, the ominous creak from above, and the sudden, chilling cascade of dust around you. The awful truth about being a coal miner in Victorian England isn't just about the back-breaking labor or the terrifying explosions. It's about the relentless, insidious threat of cave-ins, the constant, low-level anxiety that the very earth you rely on could, at any moment, betray you, crushing your life in a sudden, unforgiving embrace of rock and darkness, turning your workplace into a perpetually shifting, deadly tomb as you navigate the treacherous, claustrophobic tunnels. The grim reality of the Victorian coal mine becomes even more heartbreakingly apparent as you encounter its smallest workers. Child labor, tiny toilers. Forget the innocence of childhood. In this subterranean world, children, some barely older than toddlers, were a vital, expendable part of the workforce, forced into the darkest, most dangerous jobs due to their small size and cheap labor. You see them, small figures barely visible in the gloom, their faces streaked with coal dust, their bodies contorted by unimaginable tasks, realizing that the black gold fueling an empire came at the cost of countless stolen childhoods. It's like discovering that the intricate gears of a massive machine are actually spun by the tiny, desperate hands of children. You might be stooping low, a cramp already setting in your back, when you hear a faint, high-pitched cough from the darkness ahead. A moment later, a small form emerges from an impossibly narrow passage, perhaps pulling a heavy basket of coal behind them. This is a hurrier or a drawer, a child, male or female, whose job it is to transport coal from the working face to the main roadways. Their small stature, a cruel advantage, allows them to navigate seams too low for adults, making them indispensable, yet brutally exploited. One mainstream historical fact that utterly shatters modern sensibilities is that child labor was rampant in Victorian coal mines, with children as young as 5 or 6 years old employed in various grueling and dangerous roles, such as trappers opening and closing ventilation doors, hurriers hauling coal carts, and coal bearers. Due to their small size and extremely low wages, often working 12, 14-hour shifts, this exploitation was a widespread and accepted practice for decades. Imagine a child, perhaps your own child's age, sitting alone in the pitch black for an entire shift, perhaps 12 hours. This is the life of a trapper. Their sole job is to open and close a wooden ventilation door to allow coal wagons to pass, ensuring proper airflow in the mine and preventing gas buildup. Remember fire damp. They sit in silence, in absolute darkness as they weren't always given lamps, often with no human contact, for fear of falling asleep and causing a deadly explosion. A particularly quirky tidbit that reveals the mind-numbing boredom and isolation of these young trappers is that some would occupy themselves by singing softly or talking to themselves in the dark, their voices echoing eerily in the vast, unseen tunnels. Imagine a tiny voice all alone in the blackness, singing a lullaby to themselves to stave off terror and loneliness, a stark contrast to the lively playgrounds of today. Historians still argue whether the widespread use of child labor in Victorian mines, despite its obvious moral abhorrence, was primarily a pragmatic necessity for impoverished mining families where every wage, no matter how small, was essential for survival, or if it was predominantly driven by mine owners seeking to maximize profits by exploiting the cheapest possible labor for tasks uniquely suited to small bodies. Was it family desperation or industrial greed that put children in the pit? Other children, the hurriers and drawers, performed even more physically demanding roles. You might see a small boy or girl bent almost double with a chain attached to a belt around their waist, crawling through a low tunnel, dragging a heavy wooden cart filled with coal. Their knees and hands would be raw and bleeding, their backs permanently stooped from the unnatural posture. The tunnels were so narrow and low that even ponies couldn't fit, leaving the task to human children. The work was continuous, relentless, and utterly exhausting, with every muscle straining against the weight of the coal. For the coal bearers, a role often performed by girls and women before specific legislation. The work involved carrying heavy baskets of coal on their backs up steep ladders or along narrow passages, sometimes weighing as much as the child themselves. Their small bodies were literally crushed under the weight of the industry. Injuries were common. Children lost fingers, hands, or even limbs in machinery or from falling coal. Their spines became twisted, their lungs filled with dust from an early age, guaranteeing a short, sickly life. The psychological toll, the constant fear, the utter lack of play or education that left them stunted in every way but resilience. You watch these tiny figures in the gloom, their faces smudged black, their eyes wide and knowing. There's no innocence left in their gaze, just a profound weariness that belies their tender years. They are trapped, just like the coal they extract, in a brutal system that saw them as mere tools, expendable sources of cheap labor. The awful truth about being a coal miner in Victorian England is that its horrors extended not just to men, but to the most vulnerable members of society. The horrifying use of child labor in the deepest, narrowest seams stands as one of the darkest chapters of the Industrial Revolution. A chilling reminder of the price paid by tiny toilers whose stolen childhoods and broken bodies laid the very foundation for an empire's vast wealth. Their silent suffering, far below the earth, remains a permanent stain on the legacy of coal. Even as you witness the horrifying exploitation of child labor, you soon become aware that the brutal realities of Victorian coal mining extended beyond men and children to encompass a significant, often overlooked segment of the population: women in mines' pit-brow lasses. Forget the image of Victorian ladies in elegant dresses. Many women, driven by poverty, worked in incredibly grueling, dangerous, and physically demanding roles in and around the mines. Their lives as harsh and short as those of their male counterparts, if not more so. You see them, their faces smudged with coal dust, their bodies strong and weary, realizing that the darkness of the pit claimed the labor of entire families. Regardless of gender, it's like discovering that a demanding factory isn't just run by men, but by women engaged in backbreaking, dangerous tasks. You might encounter them as you make your way to the pit head, or perhaps deeper in the mine, though their roles shifted over time. Initially, especially in the earlier part of the Victorian era, women and girls worked underground, performing the same physically demanding tasks as boys, such as hurrying and drawing coal carts through low, narrow tunnels. You'd see them, often stripped to the waist due to the heat and exertion, straining against heavy chains, their bodies contorted. One mainstream historical fact that shocked Victorian society when widely revealed was that women and girls worked extensively underground in British coal mines in the early 19th century, performing arduous tasks like hauling coal carts and carrying heavy baskets up shafts, often in cramped and dangerous conditions, before legislation in 1842 began to prohibit their subterranean labor. This direct involvement in the deepest, most dangerous work was a harsh reality. Imagine the sheer physical toll. These women would spend 12 to 14 hours a day in the stifling, dusty darkness, their muscles screaming from the constant strain of pulling and pushing heavy loads. Their hands would be raw and calloused, their backs bent, their lungs slowly filling with the same insidious coal dust that afflicted the men. The conditions were just as dangerous, if not more so, for them, given their physical vulnerability in such brutal environments. A particularly quirky tidbit that highlights the distinct social and practical challenges faced by these female underground workers is the issue of clothing. With no specific work attire, many women would work in trousers or other practical garments that allowed for movement in the cramped spaces. A significant departure from the skirts and dresses expected of Victorian women on the surface. Imagine dressing for work in ways that defied all societal norms, simply to survive the brutal conditions of the mine. Historians still argue whether the widespread public outcry and subsequent legislation to remove women from underground mining the Mines and Collieries Act of 1842 was primarily driven by genuine humanitarian concerns for the welfare and morality of women and children, or if it was also influenced by male miners who saw women's cheaper labor as a threat to their wages and feared competition for jobs, effectively pushing women into less visible but still arduous surface roles. Was it about compassion or economic protectionism? After the 1842 Act, women were largely prohibited from working underground. However, this didn't mean they left the mining industry entirely. Instead, many transitioned to work above ground, becoming what were famously known as pit-brow lasses in some regions, especially around Lancashire. Their work was still incredibly demanding and dangerous. You might see them at the pit head, working in all weathers, sorting coal, loading wagons, or breaking larger chunks of coal with hammers. Their jobs involved handling the raw, often dusty and sharp, coal as it came up from the mine. They would pick out impurities, separating good coal from stone and shale, often by hand, in freezing winds or scorching sun. Their hands would be chapped, cut, and blackened, their faces grimed with coal dust. Their work was essential to the industry, ensuring the quality of the coal delivered to factories and homes across the nation. The conditions above ground, while perhaps less claustrophobic than the pit, were still brutal. They faced the elements, constant exposure to dust and noise, and the ever-present danger of heavy machinery and falling coal. Their wages were meager, often even less than men's, yet their contribution was vital to the family economy. You see them strong and resilient figures, their clothes perpetually stained black, their hair often tied back with scarves. There's no elegance, no delicate femininity here, just raw strength and endurance. They are the backbone of the mining communities, working alongside their fathers, husbands, and sons, sharing the industry's pervasive misery. The awful truth about being a coal miner in Victorian England extends far beyond the male worker. It encompasses the horrifying lives of women in mines. The pit brow lasses, whose grueling, often dangerous roles, whether underground or on the surface, laid bare the full human cost of an industry that demanded the labor of every member of the family, regardless of gender, all for the black gold that fueled an empire. As you descend deeper into the mine, navigating its cramped tunnels alongside men, children, and even remembering the past reality of women toiling underground, you quickly grasp another stark element of your horrifying life primitive tools, hand to mouth. Forget the massive automated machinery of modern mining. Here, like every ounce of coal extracted from the earth is won through sheer human muscle, aided by basic, often dangerous implements. Your hands, already calloused and perpetually grimy, are your primary tools, and every swing of your pickaxe is a testament to the brutal, relentless effort required to earn your meager wage. It's like trying to carve a mountain out of solid rock using only a butter knife, where every tiny chip is a monumental effort that puts your body at constant risk. You grasp your pickaxe, its wooden handle worn smooth by countless hands, its iron head blunt from relentless use. The steel tip strikes the coal face with a dull thud, sending vibrations up your arms, shaking your bones. The work is agonizingly slow. You chip away at the black seam, loosening chunks of coal, which then have to be pried off with wedges or levers. There's no heavy machinery to speak of, no power tools to ease the strain. Your body is the engine, and your pick is merely an extension of your own brute force. One mainstream historical fact that highlights the sheer physical toll of this work is that Victorian coal mining relied almost entirely on manual labor, with miners using basic handheld tools such as picks, shovels, and wedges to extract coal, making the work incredibly physically demanding and slow, contributing to widespread musculoskeletal injuries. The efficiency of a mine was often measured by the sheer volume of human effort. Imagine the deafening noise, the constant thud, thud, thud of dozens, even hundreds, of pickaxes striking coal echoes through the confined spaces, the scrape of shovels, the rattle of coal tumbling into baskets, the grunts of exertion. These sounds create a relentless, monotonous symphony of toil. Your ears constantly ring with the cacophony, a permanent fixture in your daily life. A particularly quirky tidbit that demonstrates the desperation and ingenuity, or perhaps grim resignation of miners, is the practice of holing or undercutting. This involved painstakingly chipping away at the bottom of a coal seam, creating a narrow undercut so that the coal above would eventually collapse, making it easier to extract. Imagine spending hours lying on your side, chipping away at the base of a massive wall of coal, knowing that you're deliberately destabilizing the very roof above you, all with primitive tools. Historians still argue whether the slow adoption of more advanced, Steam-powered mining machinery like rudimentary cutting machines in Victorian mines was primarily due to the immense capital investment required and the resistance of conservative mine owners, or if the sheer abundance of cheap human labor simply made such technological innovation less economically pressing for decades. Was it about cost or complacency that kept tools so primitive? Beyond the pickaxe, your other tools are equally basic. A shovel, perhaps made of iron or wood, to scoop the loosened coal into baskets or small carts. A simple hammer and wedges, used to split larger chunks of coal or to set timber props. Your lamp, a vital but fragile source of light, is always clutched carefully. Its flickering flame your only defense against total darkness and unseen gas. The tools themselves were often dangerous. A pickaxe could slip, causing severe lacerations or even striking a fellow miner in the cramped conditions. Falling rocks or collapsing coal could easily smash a limb, particularly when miners were wedging or undercutting without proper support. There was no safety equipment, no hard hats, no steel-toed boots. Your meager clothing offered no protection against the sharp edges of coal or the blunt force of falling debris. Remember those horrifying wounds and amputations we discussed from pirate life similar? If not worse, injuries were common here. The back-breaking nature of the work, compounded by the primitive tools, meant that every miner developed a distinctive gait, a permanent stoop, or a chronic ache in their joints and muscles. Your hands would be rough, scarred, and perpetually black from the coal dust that seeped into every pore. Your body itself became a testament to the brutal, grinding labor. You feel the constant strain in your arms and shoulders, the persistent ache in your lower back, and the familiar burn in your lungs. Every piece of coal you extract, every basket you fill is a hard-won victory against the unyielding earth, accomplished with sheer grit and primitive implements. The awful truth about being a coal miner in Victorian England isn't just about the dangers of the pit or the diseases. It's about the fundamental, relentless misery of manual labor with primitive tools, forcing your body to act as the primary machine, chipping away at the earth for a meager existence. Hand to mouth in the endless darkness, even as your body aches from the primitive tools and the cramped conditions. A relentless, invisible taskmaster governs your entire existence, long hours, endless toil. Forget the concept of a 9-to-5 workday or a 40-hour week. A coal miner's shift in Victorian England stretched far beyond the limits of daylight, consuming your waking hours and leaving little time for anything but a brief, exhausted sleep. You quickly learn that the only true constant in your life is the unyielding demand of the pit, an endless grind that slowly, inexorably, wears down your body and spirit. It's like being trapped on a treadmill that never stops, powered by the demands of an industrializing world. You hear the shift bosses whistle, a shrill, piercing sound that cuts through the grime and the dust. Signaling the start of your shift, this might be before dawn, as we discussed, or even in the middle of the night. Your day is not measured by the sun's passage across the sky, but by the turning of the winding gear at the pit head, counting the agonizing hours you spend underground. One mainstream historical fact that dramatically contrasts with modern labor standards is that Victorian coal miners routinely worked 12 to 14-hour shifts, sometimes even longer, 6 days a week, often with minimal breaks for meals, leading to chronic exhaustion, increased accident rates, and a life almost entirely consumed by arduous labor. The concept of workers' rights and regulated hours was still decades away from widespread implementation. Imagine the relentless monotony of those hours. Hour after hour, you wield your pickaxe, shovel coal, or haul carts through the suffocating darkness. The rhythmic sounds of the pit become a drone, blurring the passage of time. There are no clocks underground, no natural light to mark the hours. Only the increasing ache in your muscles and the growing weariness in your bones. Your only break might be a few minutes to eat your meager lunch, hunched in the dust before the work begins again. A particularly quirky tidbit that highlights the extreme length of these shifts is the common practice of children working double shifts, or overtime, when demand for coal was high, sometimes meaning they spent 18 hours or more underground, simply trapping doors or hauling coal. Imagine a child, already exhausted, being told their workday would stretch even longer, deeper into the suffocating darkness. With no real concept of time passing, historians still argue whether the extreme length of working hours in Victorian mines was primarily a direct result of the relentless demand for coal during the Industrial Revolution, forcing owners to maximize output at any cost, or if it was also a strategic choice by mine owners to keep wages low, forcing miners to work longer to earn a subsistence living, thus leveraging the desperation of the labor pool. Was it industrial demand or economic oppression that dictated the endless toil? The chronic exhaustion that results from these long hours is profound. Your body is perpetually tired, your movement sluggish, your mind dulled. This constant fatigue isn't just uncomfortable, it's incredibly dangerous. Exhaustion leads to mistakes: a dropped pickaxe, a misstep on uneven ground, a moment of inattention that could lead to a cave-in or a fall. The line between being awake and drifting into a dangerous stupor often blurs in the later hours of your shift. When you finally return to the surface, emerging from the pit, the daylight can be jarring, almost painful. If you've been on a night shift, your body, accustomed to the heat and darkness of the mine, struggles to adjust to the open air and natural light. You shuffle home, your muscles screaming in protest, your mind already dreading the sound of the whistle signaling your next descent. Your waking hours outside the mine are short, barely enough for a quick meal, a brief moment with your family, and a desperate attempt at sleep before the cycle begins anew. The lack of regulated hours meant that mine owners could demand as much labor as they deemed necessary, limited only by the physical endurance of their workers. This fueled the immense output of coal needed for factories and steam engines, but it came at the cost of the miners' health, safety, and any semblance of a personal life. You are a tool, a resource, and your time is not your own. You feel the deep, bone-weary fatigue that settles into your very being, a constant companion that overshadows any fleeting moments of rest. You watch the sun rise and set, knowing that for you, it often happens twice before you see your bed again. The awful truth about being a coal miner in Victorian England isn't just about the immediate dangers, it's about the soul-crushing reality of long hours and endless toil, a relentless grind that consumed your entire existence, turning your life into an unending cycle of descent, labor, and exhausted sleep, all in service of the insatiable hunger for black gold. Even after enduring the suffocating depths, the pervasive dust, the terrifying explosions, the crushing cave-ins, and the brutal, endless hours. The most persistent daily struggle for a Victorian coal miner was often the simple, agonizing reality of low wages poverty's grip. Forget any notion of fair compensation for your immense risks and grueling labor. Your pay was meager, inconsistent, and barely enough to keep your family from starvation, trapping you in a perpetual cycle of debt and desperation. You quickly learn that the black gold you extract from the earth brings little sparkle to your own life, serving only to fuel the industries of others while you remain firmly entrenched in destitution. It's like performing a heroic, life-threatening feat every day, only to be paid in pocket change and the constant gnawing fear of hunger. You stand at the pay office, a small, grimy shack near the pit head, waiting for your turn. The air is thick with the nervous energy of anticipation and the lingering smell of coal dust and damp. The paymaster, often a gruff individual with little sympathy, calls out names and hands over small bags of coins, or sometimes, even script that can only be spent at the company store will get to that insidious trap soon. You clutch your meager earnings, feeling their paltry weight, knowing they represent another week of risking your life in the darkness. One mainstream historical fact that utterly defines the economic reality of mining communities is that Victorian coal miners, despite the arduous and dangerous nature of their work, received extremely low wages that were often insufficient to lift their families out of poverty, leading to chronic malnutrition, poor living conditions, and reliance on child labor to supplement household income. Their immense contribution to the Industrial Revolution rarely translated into personal prosperity. Imagine the agonizing calculations you make in your head. So many mouths to feed your wife, your children including those already toiling in the pit or above ground. Remember them. Perhaps elderly parents. So little money. You need to buy bread, some potatoes, a bit of salted meat if you're lucky. There's rent for the company cottage, the cost of lamp oil, tools, and perhaps a bit of tea or sugar. Every penny is stretched, every expense scrutinized, and often, there's simply not enough to go around. A particularly quirky tidbit that highlights the precariousness of these wages is the system of docking. Miners were frequently subjected to fines or deductions from their pay for seemingly minor infractions. A wagon of coal deemed dirty containing too much rock, arriving late for a shift, or even a tool breaking. Imagine spending a 12-hour shift risking your life, only to find a significant chunk of your meager pay has been arbitrarily deducted for a reason you might not even understand. Or agree with historians, still argue whether the persistently low wages in Victorian coal mining were primarily a direct consequence of an oversupply of desperate labor, which kept prices down regardless of demand, or if they were deliberately kept low by mine owners who colluded to maximize profits. Viewing miners as an easily replaceable and exploitable commodity. Was it market forces or capitalist cruelty that maintained poverty's grip? The inconsistency of pay added another layer of misery. If demand for coal dropped, or if there was an accident that halted production, your wages could be suddenly cut or your shifts reduced. There was no unemployment insurance, no social safety net. A single week without full pay could plunge your family into immediate crisis, forcing them to go without food or to incur crippling debt. This constant financial struggle permeated every aspect of your life. Your clothes are ragged and patched, your boots worn through, your children, as we know, are sent into the pit at a tender age. Not out of malice, but because their tiny wages, however small, are absolutely essential to the family's survival. Education is a luxury few can afford. Medical care almost non-existent. Your existence is defined by a relentless, grinding poverty that is passed down through generations, tying your family irrevocably to the pit. You hear the quiet sighs of the men around you as they receive their pay, the hushed complaints, the resigned acceptance. Some men gamble away their few shillings in a desperate bid for a quick fortune, only to lose it, exacerbating their family's destitution. Others trudge home, their shoulders slumped, already planning how to stretch their meager coins. The awful truth about being a coal miner in Victorian England isn't just about the physical dangers and diseases. It's about the relentless, soul-crushing reality of low wages. It's the constant, gnawing hunger, the inability to provide for your loved ones, and the profound sense of powerlessness that comes from being trapped in a cycle of poverty. Your brutal toil fuels the wealth of an empire, but your own life remains perpetually in the shadows, a stark, miserable testament to the human cost of black gold, where every lump of coal bought at market was paid for with the endless undercompensated suffering of miners like you. As if the meager, inconsistent wages weren't enough to trap you in a life of destitution. A more insidious economic mechanism often sealed your fate company store debts trap. Forget the open market with competitive prices. In many Victorian mining communities, the mine owner also owned the only store, where miners were often paid in non-transferable scrip or pressured to buy goods on credit. This system was designed to keep you perpetually indebted, a prisoner not just to the dark pit, but to an unbreakable chain of economic exploitation. You quickly learn that your wages, however small, often never truly leave the owner's grasp, flowing right back into his coffers. It's like living in a never-ending game of Monopoly, where the landlord owns everything, and you can never collect go money. You walk past the company store, a solid, often imposing building that contrasts sharply with the flimsy miners' cottages. Its shelves are stocked with basic necessities: flour, sugar, lamp oil, rough cloth. But the prices, you quickly notice, are inflated, far higher than they would be in a truly free market. You're paid not in actual coin, but often in trucker script, tokens that are only redeemable at this very store. One mainstream historical fact that reveals this widespread exploitation is that many Victorian coal miners were paid, in whole or in part, in non-transferable scrip or forced to purchase goods on credit from company-owned stores. Truck shops, where prices were inflated, keeping miners perpetually indebted to the mine owner and effectively preventing them from seeking employment elsewhere. This truck system was a pervasive form of economic control. Imagine receiving your meager wages, not as the king's sterling, but as a handful of brass tokens or slips of paper bearing the mine's emblem. These tokens are worthless anywhere else. You can't take them to a neighboring village to buy cheaper bread, or use them to pay a doctor who isn't employed by the company. Your entire economic universe is confined to this single establishment, controlled by the very man who owns your labor. A particularly quirky tidbit about the truck system is that the company store often had an impressive array of goods beyond just food and necessities, including items like fancy clothing or trinkets, designed to tempt miners into even deeper debt. Imagine being offered a shiny new watch on credit, knowing that buying it means you'll be working off the debt for months, perhaps years, and you can't even take your labor elsewhere. Historians still argue whether the truck system was primarily a practical solution for mine owners in remote areas where traditional stores might not exist, ensuring workers had access to goods, or if it was predominantly a deliberate, predatory tactic to maximize profits by monopolizing consumption and trapping workers in a cycle of insurmountable debt, regardless of actual necessity. Was it about convenience or control that made the company store a trap? The pressure to use the company store was immense. If you didn't buy on credit, or if you tried to take your meager cash wages elsewhere, you might find your shifts cut, your pay mysteriously docked, or even lose your job entirely. Foremen often received incentives for encouraging their men to buy from the company store, creating an internal system of enforcement. Your ability to get work, and thus to feed your family, was inextricably linked to your willingness to submit to this economic coercion. The insidious nature of debt was perhaps the cruelest aspect. If a miner's family suffered an illness, or if an accident prevented him from working, they would often have no choice but to take on more credit from the company store to survive. This debt would accumulate, creating a seemingly unbreakable chain that tethered them to the mine. Generations could be born into the same debt, inheriting the financial burdens of their fathers and grandfathers, effectively creating a form of economic servitude. You feel the constant anxiety of a dwindling balance, the fear of falling too deep into the red. You watch your wife and children making impossible choices between a new pair of boots for winter or a bit more meat for dinner, knowing that every purchase at the company store digs the hole deeper. The walls of your life aren't just the dark rock of the mine, they are the invisible, but unbreakable chains of debt that bind you to the owner, a financial trap far more pervasive than any physical barrier. The awful truth about being a coal miner in Victorian England isn't just about the physical horrors, it's about the profound, soul-crushing economic exploitation epitomized by the company store. It's the constant, gnawing fear of insurmountable debt. The knowledge that even your hard-won wages flow back into the same pockets, ensuring that your life, like the coal itself, remains perpetually under the control of others, trapped in a miserable, never-ending cycle of toil and destitution, all for the black gold that fueled an empire, but never enriched your own family. Even after you've escaped the brutal confines of the pit, negotiated the meager wages, and navigated the insidious trap of the company store, your miserable existence as a Victorian coal miner extends beyond the mine gates into the very place you call home, housing squalid, crowded. Forget cozy cottages with manicured gardens. The typical accommodation provided by mine owners was often a cramped, poorly built, and unsanitary dwelling, barely a shelter from the elements. fostering disease and offering little respite from the grime and hardship of your working life. You quickly learn that even your sanctuary is another facet of your pervasive misery, a constant reminder of your lowly place in society. It's like living in a perpetual state of camping, but your tent is always damp, always crowded, and never truly clean. You arrive back at your cottage after a 12-hour shift, your body aching, your face streaked with coal dust. The row of identical, brick-terraced houses stretches endlessly, each indistinguishable from the next, often built hastily by the mine owner to house his workforce. There's no individuality, no pride in ownership. These are functional, cheap dwellings designed to maximize output, not comfort. One mainstream historical fact that highlights the dire living conditions is that Victorian coal miners and their families typically lived in squalid, overcrowded, and poorly constructed housing, often owned by the mining company, with inadequate sanitation, ventilation, and access to clean water, contributing to widespread disease and a low quality of life. These company towns or colliery villages were extensions of the mine's exploitative system. Imagine stepping inside. The air is heavy, stale, and often damp, carrying the lingering smell of coal smoke, unwashed bodies, and stale food. The rooms are small, perhaps 1 or 2 downstairs and a single bedroom upstairs for an entire family. Sometimes a dozen people crammed into tiny spaces. There's no privacy. Children sleep head to toe. Parents share beds, and every sound, every whisper, is heard by all. A particularly quirky tidbit that demonstrates the crude construction of these homes is the common use of earth or slag waste material from coal processing for flooring in some cottages, particularly downstairs. Imagine your home having a dirt floor that constantly tracked in dust and mud, making cleanliness an impossible dream. Historians still argue whether the squalid housing provided by mine owners was primarily a pragmatic necessity, given the rapid expansion of mining communities and the need for cheap, immediate accommodation, or if it was also a deliberate strategy to reinforce the miners' dependence on the company, effectively trapping them in a self-contained, impoverished system. Was it about efficiency or control that made housing so miserable? Sanitation is almost non-existent. There's no indoor plumbing. Water, when available, is typically drawn from a communal tap or well, shared by dozens of families and often contaminated. Remember the discussion about contaminated water in Pompeii? It's still a problem here. Outdoor privies, shared by multiple households, are rudimentary and often overflowing, attracting flies and disease. Waste, both human and domestic, is often simply discarded into open gutters or piles, creating breeding grounds for rats, vermin, and the very diseases like cholera and typhoid that constantly plague the community. Heating, ironically, comes from the very coal you extract, burned in an open grate, filling the air with more smoke and soot. Ventilation is poor, making the air perpetually thick and unhealthy. The constant dampness, from leaky roofs or rising ground moisture, contributes to pervasive respiratory problems, especially for those already suffering from black lung. The constant grime from the mine permeates everything. Coal dust is tracked in from the pit. It settles on furniture and clothing, and even food. Windows, if they exist, are small and often kept closed against the cold or the perpetual dust, further stifling the air. The very act of trying to keep clean, or even breathe cleanly, is a losing battle in these conditions. You collapse onto your hard, straw-filled mattress, feeling the ache in every bone, but the discomfort of your surroundings offers no true rest. You hear the coughs of your children in the next cot, the murmur of voices from the cramped living area, and the sounds of your neighbors through the thin walls. Your home is not a haven. It's another extension of the pit, a miserable, crowded space where the grim realities of your life follow you indoors. The awful truth about being a coal miner in Victorian England isn't just about the dangers below ground. It's about the pervasive misery of your daily life, even above ground. The squalid, crowded housing you endure is a testament to the brutal social contract of the era, where your labor was exploited and your basic human needs for comfort, hygiene, and dignity were almost entirely ignored, ensuring that poverty's grip extended from the dark pit to the very walls of your so-called home. After enduring the suffocating pit, the insidious dust, the looming explosions, the crushing cave-ins, the back-breaking toil, the meager wages, the insidious company store, and the squalid housing, a simmering rage begins to build within the mining communities. This boiling frustration, born of intolerable conditions, often led to the desperate and dangerous reality of strikes and protests. Desperate fights. Forget peaceful negotiations or polite requests. These were often brutal confrontations between desperate miners seeking basic human dignity and powerful mine owners, backed by the full force of the law and, often, the military. You quickly learn that standing up for yourself can be just as dangerous as going down the pit. But sometimes, the misery is so profound, you have no other choice. It's like challenging a dragon with a broken pickaxe, knowing the odds are against you, but having nothing left to lose. You sit in a cramped, smoky miner's cottage, perhaps your own, listening to the heated whispers of your fellow miners. The talk isn't of coal seams or safety lamps, but of wages, of long hours, of the relentless deductions at the company store. The grievances are universal, shared by every family in the village. The air is thick with a mixture of fear and determination. You know what a strike means: no work, no pay, and immediate hardship for your already struggling family. But the alternative, continuing under these conditions, feels like a slow, agonizing death. One mainstream historical fact that highlights this constant struggle is that Victorian coal miners frequently engaged in strikes and protests to demand better wages, safer working conditions, and fairer treatment from mine owners, often facing violent suppression by private security, police, or even the military, leading to injury, arrests, and prolonged periods of starvation for their families. These were not just labor disputes, they were desperate battles for survival. Imagine the decision to strike. It's a collective gamble, a leap into an even deeper abyss of poverty. You might see a mass meeting at the pit head. Hundreds of men, their faces grim, their resolve hardened by shared misery. They vote to strike, a powerful, unified voice against the seemingly invincible power of the mine owner. But you know the owner will not yield easily. His wealth, his influence, his very power depends on keeping you subservient. A particularly quirky tidbit that reflects the miners' solidarity and sometimes desperation is the informal networks of support that emerge during strikes. Communities would often pool meager resources, share food, and even rely on sympathetic local shopkeepers, those not tied to the company store, of course, to extend credit, allowing families to survive for a few days or weeks without wages. Imagine a community holding bake sales or sharing their last scraps of food, all to support a strike that might ultimately cost them everything. Historians still argue whether the sporadic and often localized nature of early Victorian mining strikes, lacking widespread unionization, significantly limited their effectiveness in achieving long-term systemic change, or if each individual strike, even when unsuccessful, contributed incrementally to raising awareness and laying the groundwork for future labor reforms and stronger union movements. Did they win battles or just lay foundations? The owner's response is swift and brutal. The pit gates are locked. Strikebreakers, often brought in from other regions or desperate unemployed men, are hired. Then come the security forces. Private police, often armed and aggressive, are brought in to guard the pit and intimidate the striking miners. You might see them patrolling the streets of your village, their presence a constant provocation. Confrontations are inevitable. You might join a picket line, standing firm against the strikebreakers, the air thick with tension. Shouts turn to shoves, shoves to blows. The police often intervene, not to mediate, but to protect the owner's property and interests. You could be beaten, arrested, or injured in the ensuing clashes. The violence is raw, immediate, and utterly terrifying. A stark reminder that your fight is against a system willing to use physical force to maintain its control. Families suffer immediately. Without wages, the gnawing hunger becomes unbearable. Children cry from hunger, and your wife, her face drawn with worry, tries to stretch the last scraps of food. The threat of eviction from your company-owned cottage looms large. The strike, meant to bring justice, quickly becomes another source of immense misery, a desperate fight against starvation as well as exploitation. You feel the cold rage burning in your stomach, mingled with the crushing fear for your family. You stand firm, shoulder to shoulder with your comrades, knowing that this desperate fight is for a dignity that money cannot buy. The awful truth about being a coal miner in Victorian England isn't just about the dangers of the pit. It's about the brutal reality of strikes and protests. The desperate fights for basic human rights, where your only weapons are solidarity and courage, pitted against the overwhelming power of the mine owner and the state. A constant, agonizing struggle for survival that extended far beyond the dark confines of the mine. Even amidst the desperate fights of strikes and the crushing weight of poverty, the most profound and visceral despair in a Victorian mining community often erupted after a disaster rescue efforts often futile. When the earth roared, when an explosion tore through the tunnels, or a cave-in sealed off a seam, the immediate aftermath was a frantic, desperate scramble to save lives. A harrowing race against time, gas and crushing rock. You witnessed the heroic but often heartbreaking attempts to bring men home, realizing that even the most courageous efforts were frequently swallowed by the unforgiving darkness of the pit. It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack, but the needle is your loved one. The haystack is a collapsing, poisonous labyrinth, and your only tools are courage and hope. You're at the pithead, the scene of frantic, chaotic activity. A sudden, violent tremor shook the ground, followed by a muffled roar from deep within the earth, sending a plume of dust and smoke billowing from the shaft. You know instantly what it means: an explosion, a cave-in, or perhaps both. Panic surges through the crowd of wives, mothers, and children who have rushed from their cottages, their faces etched with terror. Their loved ones are down there. One mainstream historical fact that underscores the sheer danger and low success rate of these desperate efforts is that Victorian coal mine rescue efforts were largely rudimentary, dangerous, and often futile, hampered by a lack of specialized equipment, the immediate threats of after-damp carbon monoxide and further collapses, and the sheer scale of debris leading to prolonged searches that frequently ended in the recovery of bodies rather than survivors. Rescuers often risked their own lives with little chance of success. Imagine the agonizing wait. Hours stretch into an eternity. The pithead, usually a place of grim routine, is transformed into a crucible of raw emotion. Women wring their hands, their eyes fixed on the shaft, praying for a sign of life. Men, often those who were on the surface or from other shifts, immediately volunteer, their faces grim but determined. They grab lamps, picks, and shovels, ready to descend into the very hell they just escaped. A particularly quirky tidbit about these early rescue efforts is the incredible bravery of the firemen, who were actually gas testers, not firefighters as we think of them today. These men, often experienced miners, would be among the first to descend after an explosion, risking their lives to test for dangerous gases with their open flame lamps, a terrifying thought. Given the risk of reignition, or later by carrying canaries, remember those little feathered warning systems. Imagine trusting your life to a man whose job involves deliberately walking into potentially explosive gas to find survivors, often with only a tiny bird to warn him. Historians still argue whether the lack of effective regulation for mine safety and rescue equipment in the early Victorian era was primarily due to the prevailing laissez-faire economic philosophy, minimizing government intervention in industry, or if it was a systemic failure to prioritize human life over industrial profit, driven by powerful mine owners who resisted costly safety improvements? Was it ideology or greed that made rescues so futile? You watch as the rescuers, black-faced and grim, are lowered into the darkness. Their progress is agonizingly slow. Tunnels are blocked by tons of fallen rock and twisted timbers. The air is thick with smoke, dust, and the silent killer, afterdamp. They grope through the darkness, calling out names, listening for any faint sound of life. Their own lamps flicker, threatening to extinguish in the oxygen-depleted air. Time is the ultimate enemy. Survivors of the initial blast, if any, are often injured, trapped, and slowly suffocating from the afterdamp. Every hour that passes diminishes the chances of finding anyone alive. The hope at the surface slowly turns to despair, then to a quiet, agonizing acceptance. When bodies are finally recovered, they are often disfigured beyond recognition by the blast or the crush of rock. They are brought to the surface, laid out for identification, a grim procession that tears at the hearts of the waiting families. Sometimes, only fragments are found, or entire sections of the mine remain too unstable to enter, leaving bodies permanently entombed below. The wall of bones from ancient China might be a legend, but here the earth truly swallows its victims. The sound of the mine pumps, usually a steady thrum, now seems to beat like a mournful drum, signaling the relentless flow of water into the deeper workings, threatening to drown any trapped survivors. The air above ground is filled with the weeping of women, the hushed prayers of men, and the chilling silence that falls when another body is brought to the surface. You feel the cold weight of despair, the shared grief that washes over the entire community. The awful truth about being a coal miner in Victorian England isn't just about the dangers you face every day. It's about the profound, heartbreaking reality of rescue efforts that were often futile. It's the agonizing weight, the desperate courage of those who volunteer, and the overwhelming certainty that for many, the dark maw of the pit would become their final, horrifying tomb. A silent testament to the countless lives swallowed by the relentless hunger for coal. After enduring the suffocating pits, the invisible dust, the fiery explosions, the crushing cave-ins, the brutal child labor, the grueling work of women, the primitive tools, the endless shifts, the meager wages, the insidious debt traps, the squalid housing, the desperate fights of strikes, and the often futile rescue efforts, you finally emerge from the harrowing reality of a Victorian coal miner's life to confront its complex and enduring legacy, industrial might. Human cost. The black gold extracted from these brutal depths powered an empire, transformed a nation, and laid the foundations for the modern world. But its colossal achievements are forever stained by the unimaginable suffering of the millions who toiled, sickened, and died to bring it to the surface. It's like looking at a magnificent, gleaming engine of progress, only to realize its pistons were forged in human misery, and its fuel was human lives. You consider the vast landscape of Victorian England, the roaring factories, the intricate railway networks, the towering steamships, the bustling cities, the warm homes, all dependent on the relentless supply of coal. This was the fuel that powered the Industrial Revolution, transformed Britain into a global superpower, and fundamentally reshaped the course of human history. One mainstream historical fact that highlights this transformative power is that coal was the primary fuel source of the British Industrial Revolution, driving unprecedented economic growth, technological innovation, and global power. But this rapid industrialization was built on the immense human cost of brutal and dangerous mining conditions that claimed countless lives and inflicted widespread suffering on entire communities. The coal was a source of national strength, but also national tragedy. Imagine the sheer scale of the change. Villages mushroomed into grimy industrial towns. Landscapes were scarred by slag heaps and pit heads, and entire regions became dedicated to the relentless extraction of this vital resource. The wealth generated from coal was immense, enriching mine owners, industrialists, and the nation's coffers. A particularly quirky tidbit that reflects this deep dependence is the common phrase, coals to Newcastle, meaning doing something pointless. Because Newcastle was so famously abundant in coal that importing it would be absurd. Imagine a city so defined by its primary resource that it became a national idiom, a testament to its singular economic identity. Historians still argue whether the long-term societal benefits of the Industrial Revolution, driven by coal, ultimately justified the horrifying human cost borne by the mining communities, or if the pace of industrialization could have been achieved with more humane conditions and greater investment in safety. Had the political will and regulatory frameworks existed earlier? Was it a necessary evil, or an avoidable tragedy, that fueled the nation's might? However, as you've lived through it, you know the other side of that legacy. You carry the invisible scars of the dust in your lungs, the phantom pain of limbs crushed by falling rock, the lingering fear of explosions, and the dull ache of constant hunger from meager wages. You remember the child toilers, the women enduring grueling work, and the families trapped in squalid cottages and inescapable debt? The industrial might was bought at an agonizing human price, a brutal reality often conveniently overlooked in the grand narratives of progress. The legacy also includes the slow, hard-won battles for reform. The horrifying conditions you endured eventually led to public outcry, investigations, and landmark legislation. The Mines and Collieries Act of 1842, prohibiting women and young children from working underground, and later acts regulating safety and working hours, were direct responses to the misery you experienced. Your suffering, and the suffering of millions like you, laid the groundwork for modern labor laws, safety regulations, and the eventual rise of trade unions, striving for dignity and fair treatment for workers. Your horrifying life, in a strange way, paved the way for a more just future. You reflect on the contrast, the clean, well-lit homes of today, the abundant energy, the comforts of modern life, all owe an unspoken debt to the dark. Dangerous pits of Victorian England and the men, women, and children who sacrificed their lives and health within them. The coal once extracted, burned brightly, illuminating and powering a new age. But the cost, the awful human cost, lingered in the shadows, a permanent stain on the otherwise dazzling progress. You stand now, a spectral figure of the past, gazing at the legacy. The Great Exhibition of 1851, a triumph of Victorian innovation and industry, showcased Britain's technological prowess, powered by the very coal you extracted. But behind every gleaming machine, every impressive invention, lay the horrifying truth of the mines, a testament to lives consumed by relentless toil. The awful truth about being a coal miner in Victorian England isn't just a historical anecdote. It's a profound, chilling reminder that the foundations of modern industrial society were built on a staggering human cost, a legacy of both incredible power and immeasurable suffering, forever etched into the very fabric of the earth and the memory of humanity. Now, as the echoes of the picks and the cries from the pit fade into the distance, and the relentless hum of industrial machinery softens, let the stillness of your room embrace you. The dust, the damp, the darkness, and the profound misery of the Victorian coal mine are safely in the past, part of a history that now dissolves into the gentle hum of your fan. You've journeyed through a truly horrifying existence, and now it's time for you to find your own peaceful rest. Let your mind unwind, your muscles relax, and sink into a deep, undisturbed sleep, far from the black depths and the crushing weight of the earth. End of script. Sweet dreams.